Before we start, the scores are in. Before the debate, we had 15 anti-cukes and we had 10 votes pro-cukes. And then in a fantastic bit of mathematics, by the end of it, we had 5 people for cukes and 13 people against cukes. So there are a few people against cukes now, so well done.
It's a higher percentage.
So I will. I'm pretty lost. What was short? Okay.
It was always going to happen.
So we did have a question from Twitter, which I think we could probably use to kick off the park bench. Again, just to reiterate, if you want to get involved in the discussion, come take the empty seats. Someone that's already sat should be polite and then leave. And it's probably, we'll give Martin first refusal of that and then Kevin, as they've been working hard this evening, shall we say. So the question is, can Gherkin be used as manual testing documentation and would there be benefit? So we'll use that to kick off the discussion, please.
Yes, because I've seen it using a tool called TestRail, I think it is, which is a nice way to document manual tests using the Gherkin style, working very well in my last organisation.
I think there's a lot of benefit to standardising that language, but not necessarily making it so that you have to build that automation around the back of it. So you have that consistent, you look at those tests, you understand what the functionality is. So you've got the best of both worlds. You're not having to maintain this entire infrastructure, like you were saying before, where it becomes this task for somebody to maintain a whole code suite. But you also get the benefit that you were coming up with, which is that language that those conversations that you're having with the business people and having that consistent language that everything looks the same, everything sounds the same, everything is tested the same.
I've also seen Gherkin used as a manual test suite. And I find it slightly ironic because in order for it to work effectively as a manual test suite, you probably have to include details of how to do stuff. You know, click on this button, follow this link. So your Gherkin would have to be at a lower level, closer to the metal, than is recommended by the Cucumber people. It's going to be more, the steps are going to be more written in physical interaction terms rather than in terms of domain concepts and domain features, which feels a little bit ironic.
I would just ask why you want it as a manual test suite. So if you get this automated test, this is repeatable, it's quick, it's easy. I could potentially see it used using tools such as Pickles for creating documentation as a reference point. I don't really see why you would have a manual tester doing that. Yeah, but that's a different thing, right? Whether you have automated tests or manual tests. If you don't have those automated tests, for whatever reason. But you do have those automated tests with people.
You see lots more when you're running manual tests, don't you? You see more than just the script you're following.
But I would have a manual tester more boundary testing edge cases, things that weren't foreseen up front to write the cucumber tests. How can I break this system rather than a happy path of general cucumber tests?
Outsource testing. If you've got this quite specific way of documenting these tests, it would be a lot easier to bring in an external company and just put lots of boots on the ground that doesn't understand your product, but understands that business language. And you're not having to maintain this code suite. You can have an overriding piece of documentation that says, this is how our tests are wrote. And what we expect you to do is go and click through the software. And say they are inevitably going to find other things and possibly bring things up, but it's kind of like they become a starter. Yeah, and you can actually then outsource that testing to people who don't understand your product, because those manual testers that you're referring to there, those ones are people who really know your product inside and out. You know, they're expensive in domain terms to to actually train them up.
Where does that sit with the testing pyramid? It sounds like you've got a lot of these. It sounds like your pyramid is like that now.
Not familiar with the testing pyramid.
So you're supposed to have not many expensive manual tests, a few more automated end-to-end integration type tests, lots more unit tests. So as you get further away from the user, you have lots more to test all the details.
Probably sit in between then. So it's kind of like you've got unit tests, but it becomes a cheap way to do integration testing and what's of it.
I think you raise a good point where it's a starting point. If they're literally replicating the cucumber tests, what's the point? If they're using it as a starting point to find other things, to think about other things, yeah, I think cucumber will actually be helpful then. Because like you say, it's a rough guide to how this should work. They should know what they should expect to see. Because without these cucumber tests, you'd have to give them the requirements documents, maybe. Yeah.
Which they've got to then understand.
Exactly.
They've got to actually read from front to back and actually understand these things.
What I found works quite well is when, for whatever reason, you haven't had time to write the automated tests, you've at least got them as manual tests, which you then, when the heat dies down on a big deadline, can then go back and use them to write the automated tests. And they're interchangeable. So I can use the same language for manual tests or automated tests. You don't have to write automated tests. You can choose just to use your very happy path smoke test critical path, which I find it works best with those kind of automated tests. But then when you want to do a more thorough regression, you're using the same language and really no harm from that. Countering the point about them having to be more specific, I probably disagree in the sense that you also want them to be resilient to change. So it is then reliant on the whoever's doing that manual testing to be able to read them and understand what that means, and it's not like there's a specific point on the page where something's going to be, as much as being able to follow the user flow to test the application.
There's a danger that the tester has to have what you would write as step definitions in their head.
Well, that's domain knowledge, and that's just generally being good at what you do, and the balance between having huge reams of documentation and monkeys doing work by pressing buttons, or having empowered, skilled engineers in your team, which I think is more valuable, but also hard.
I would say it's not a replacement. You can use it as that additional thing, and it's hard to find and train these really skilled test engineers that can know your products inside and out and actually be able to spot from just clicking through a screen at 400 miles an hour and go, oh, that screen was a bit wrong. These ones are being more specific, and it's you can push it back to the business people to say, actually tell me what you expect to see and write it in this way, and we will farm it off to our testers and they will validate those tests for us. Yeah, it's not as cheap as unit tests.
No, but I've just got a bit of a problem with the idea that you farm things off to testers, and maybe this is getting a bit off piece, but quality analysts in my mind, they're some of the most valuable people in the organisation. They have the best understanding of domain knowledge. They act as that communication bridge between developers, BAs, product managers and whoever else, and they actually hold more understanding of the product and how it works than most people do. And then in that sense, well, obviously
you
not
agree, or
You're
supposed to sit down if you want to.
It was a sneeze that I tried badly to.
If you want to sneeze, you have to take one of the seats. So is all of this, one of you just now said something like, effectively it's all about people using it. Is all of this, all these tools, all these techniques, are they all compensating for not having a developer and a customer sitting down pairing?
Yeah, well, I've never in my working life had the opportunity to see that working at that kind of, maybe once in a while, but these business people do not have time to be spending half of their day sitting down and pair programming. As much as we'd love that in some ideal panacea, it doesn't really happen that often.
So everything we're talking about is compensating us for not having that.
I would say it's not. That's expensive. Is what I think. What I'm saying is that to have a business person and a developer pairing is expensive. Obviously, the counter argument before you jump in is that it's expensive to not do it.
Yes. But then you've got to be in a position where everybody understands the value. There's so few organisations that really do get that. It's a similar thing with estimation. It's great when everybody understands the risks with estimation and everybody's on board with it. But to say you're going to have an organisation where everybody gets that, well, that's where the perils of estimation come from. Not that estimation is bad. It's just that this idea is very rare.
Is the idea that they need to be sat next to you, working with you? Obviously that'd be fantastic if you could have a customer literally sat next to you all the time. That'd be fantastic. Everyone would love that.
Really?
But to me, this is more about, as Kevin kind of touched on earlier, I think, it's about having those small feedback loops. And so if this is the way that you can get your feedback loop the smallest, then so be it. Obviously, it would be better to have a smaller feedback loop, which could be the customer sat next to you, which is pretty much the smallest feedback loop you can get, other than the customer writing it themselves. But if the closest you can get is you writing some gherkin with them, and then you going and implementing some tests which implement that, is that not a kind of a better sort of go-between?
I suppose if you're talking about feedback from the functionality and how it works, that's different to the sort of the regression style of looking for. So I think one of the main benefits of using this is a regression suite to make sure you've not broken something by your refactoring, which I don't think is the same as having that feedback loop with a customer saying doesn't quite work the way I wanted. Those feedback loops, absolutely, that's sitting with the business person to do that.
If you're using this for feedback on your refactoring, for example, would unit tests or integration tests be a better platform for that?
Depends what you mean by integration tests. That's where it gets a bit nuanced.
My turn.
He's looking at it.
So I see integration tests as a step up from unit tests, where unit tests are testing a function or I think Martin said earlier, a unit of work almost. So it's not necessarily a class, a group of classes. It's almost the inside of your hexagon in hexagonal architecture. Whereas an integration test I would see as touching at least one of those outer edges of your hexagon. So it could be touching a database, it could be touching some external service, or even some faked out external service which actually goes over the network, or maybe even using your web UI. I see the difference between that and acceptance tests is with integration tests, you're doing that to reduce risks around those specific integrations, as opposed to being things that a customer would sign up on. So a customer would probably very unlikely sign off on the fact that you can talk to your database successfully, and that when you write a row, that row is in there. Whereas they might say, if I submit a bug request, and when I go to view that bug request, all the information is there, or something along those lines.
So where I found Cucumber doesn't work well, and I think where the great idea that Cucumber came from was this idea that it is this language that you share with the business, and then there's this idea that they could look at your test suite and just say that everything is fine. I've never seen that work. I've never seen it happen. I probably imagine the Cucumber community is probably less of the mind that It's all about having this full end-to-end readable, executable specification the entire organisation shares. What I have found it's very good at is precisely that, is collecting, well, it's not just this particular unit of work, but when I do this and this thing happens. And that doesn't have to be a full end-to-end stack. It can just be the particular part of the application that matters. It can be the bit that they see, and it doesn't have to perpetuate all the way down. And then you can just, put some fakes in underneath that, and it mocks out all the APIs, the databases, and everything else. It's literally just testing the layer that they see. And I've seen that work really, really well. So I don't know if that's the same thing as you're saying, or
not necessarily. I guess I think I probably rarely mocked and stuffed things out too much whilst working with cucumber tests. I will tend to try and work more with the
full
end-to-end system, but I will probably have very few of these tests overall. These are my almost my sanity check. Everything is okay. Whereas my integration tests will be telling me by changing this interface, you've broken these subsystems.
Yeah, so I'd agree with everything you were saying, basically. I think where I get concerned is where maybe Kevin's not conflating the idea of automated feature tests with Cucumber, but where other people will see that, and where what people will do instead is just absolutely nothing. And so you'll have unit tests, you'll have some integration tests, but you've got nothing actually checking everything works, which means you just have to do full manual regression testing with every release. I worked on teams where you could just literally promote the whole code base at the start and have full confidence that everything worked. The only things that you'd manually test were new features for the first time, but then once you've done that, and you had the automated test around, you'd never test it again. The alternative is be a master craftsman and be able to do it all yourself in code. I don't know many teams or people that have that ability to do so. So I think the concern is that the barrier to entry to be able to do things like this then becomes very high, it puts people off, and then just probably have even worse, Selenium manual, those sort of manually created Selenium scripts were absolutely abysmal. But now what you have is you can actually program them rather than being Selenium in separate QA. So it still seems better than that. So that's why I struggle with throw the whole thing away, it's all terrible.
I want to come at it from the other side, so from the other side of you're going to be a master craftsman as everything. And go back a bit to what we were talking about before about the business doing some of the programming. I think that is a horrendous idea, because at the moment, the people in the business who have the problem understand the problem in the real world. And if we try and teach them this numpty imperative programming language, we're saying, right, you understand the problem, you understand the solution in the real world, forget about that now, and we're going to make you terrible programmers, we're going to give you the bare minimum knowledge about how to program it in a computer step by step. So forget what you know about the real solution and now think about how a computer would solve it. And I think that's a really terrible thing to do.
That's why I got up, actually. What problem are we trying to solve here? Because
are we turning them from people who understand the real problem to terrible programmers trying to solve the problem?
That's the thing. What's Cucumber trying to do? It's not as good at writing unit tests for machines to run really quickly as things like NUnit, MS Test, whatever framework you want to use. We know we can write in that. We're good at that. Or we can have a good start at it anyway.
Some people.
Yeah. So what we're trying to say is we're bad at talking to people. Let's try and get them to sort of talk computer.
Let's bring them over and turn into terrible programmers, because then we can talk to them sort of on the same level.
Yeah, I totally agree that the less manual testing you do, the better, because that's expensive. If I can run 4,000 unit tests in 5 seconds, great. When that'll take 2 weeks for some person that I hired to do. But I don't know about you, for several decades now I've been learning to talk to humans. Why don't I just try and be a bit better about that? And when someone comes up to me and says, I'd like this page to do this, or I'd like to be able to go to a computer and do this. Why don't I sit there and go, I don't understand that. Can you tell me a bit more about it? Have the dialogue. You don't need some faux programming language to
I
make
agree.
you
I
go.
feel very much
"That
that it's a
doesn't make
case of instead of sitting down and having the conversation and gathering requirements, we're saying, awesome, go away and write up the requirements, and then we'll, in this natural language, and then we'll interpret them, and that's our gathering requirements stage.
Yeah, and if it's ambiguous or if there's something, it's the joke of the wife who says, go out and get some eggs, and if they have any, buy, it's
Yes.
the thing.
Do you think some of this is about, from a developer's perspective, asking for it? Because if they wrote the test, if they wrote all of these...
I imagine it allows you to disavow responsibility because they wrote the tests very easily. If you're that way
Is that
inclined.
part of the reason why some people want to do this? Is they're pushing the responsibility then back onto the business people and say, well, we didn't write a test that says that was to do it like that.
It's the investment top to bottom. If the people at the top aren't invested in code being written, that's a problem. If we're not invested in being able to say, well, I understood completely what you told me to do, and I still got it wrong, or whichever way around it is, we need to be able to say, I thought I knew what it was you wanted to do, this was the implementation I provided, let's just have the conversation about it.
Is the problem there not necessarily investment? Because investment implies that people are coming at this half-hearted. To me, this seems like a systems problem. Like your analysis system for working out what needs to go into your software making system is the boundary there is the problem. And is Gherkin, partly playing devil's advocate there, is Gherkin a way of making that boundary easier? Like there are lots of places I've worked where we've had conversations, it doesn't necessarily translate to working software.
I think half-hearted is a good phrase there, and in my mind, I started off when I found Cucumber and Gherkin and all this stuff, it seemed like such a shiny, wonderful solution. And what it's boiled down to, in my mind, is it is a bit half-hearted. It's something in the middle. It's trying to bridge a gap that actually there are better ways to bridge.
I think
And
it's...
I'm not saying I have the solution for that, but I don't think it's Gherkin.
To cite Uncle Bob again, there you go, Martin. I think it's treating the symptom rather than the problem. The symptom is we write terrible tests, we don't capture the requirements properly, we don't understand the system, and it offers this wonderful shiny thing where you go, well, the people who give us the requirements, how about they just write it in plain English? There we go, that will surely solve the problem.
Sorry, I do have to step in again because I think that's a massive straw man, because I don't think it was ever about farming it off on someone else. If you look at the past, it was like you had completely separate business analysts writing big use case documents in this waterfall style. The engineering teams were never involved, and literally, yes, the stuff was passed to them. But in this new agile world, it's all about collaboration. The whole point of a user story is the start of a conversation. The whole point of creating any kind of requirements is it's collaborative, and it's not passing the buck and just saying, right, well, it's your problem now because you vote. If you're getting into that situation, it's not them absorbing themselves responsibility, it's you, because you are essentially saying, I don't care. I don't think anybody, I really am not like a massive cucumber advocate. I'm not, but I just feel like it's getting really shat on beyond a valuable level of being healthy, because it then just becomes all completely thrown out. And like I say, what else is there? Well, I'd love to hear some good alternatives. It would be great. The software community continues to evolve, and it's really fantastic. But I get a bit concerned when I hear it coming from that angle, because it feels like just very much going the wrong way with the conversation on a kind of healthy manner of what is interesting about that.
I was just going to say something, Jonathan. You made a good point there about, we've been improving things. It used to be waterfall, it used to be, right, great, thanks for that spec, we'll go away for 2 years and come back with something we really didn't want.
And we've got a lot better at that, and it's only through trying and failing and iterating that those kind of processes have improved. And on one hand, I can see, okay, one of the complaints I heard, quite a significant complaint by the sound of it, was that the tool set's crap, the language is crap, let's just throw it away and try something else. Maybe, if we work at it, we will get something where you can refactor these things, where you can make better tests where, you know, putting a comma in a sentence or capitalising this, that, the other doesn't matter. But then again, maybe we're on the right track with going with the more agile solutions and the interaction with customers, with business analysts, with whoever it is, doing the whole agile iterations thing. Maybe we should focus on developing that rather than pretending it can all be solved with languages and frameworks and things.
But we still do waterfall. Almost everybody still does waterfall. We talk about this fabulous new world where we're all agile. I don't see it. I don't see it very often. And most of the places I see where people are writing user stories, even if they're writing them in Gherkin, they're still waterfalling. And I agree that the utopian ideal of sitting pairing with the customer is extremely rare to achieve, but equally, most places I see who think they're agile are still waterfalling and are just using these tools as different branding for what they always used to do. And so I'm not seeing that agile solves the problem. And in fact, in many ways, it masks the problem because of the way people are using that word. Secondly, I did talk about an alternative, which is use a unit testing framework and properly refactor your tests. Has anybody watched Steve Freeman's talk, Given When Then Considered Harmful? I'll post a link to it tomorrow. I'll use the hashtag XPMan. It's only a 20-minute talk. He takes a set of Gherkin specs and refactors them to remove the duplication, including the word given. And he ends up with very nicely readable tests written in RSpec that convey more meaning, have fewer implementation details visible at the surface, and are just as readable from a business point of view. So I'll post that link tomorrow.
So I don't know whether it was the same, but I came from a sort of automated testing background, and one of the things that we did was building with NUnit and Selenium was building sort of individual unit tests where you use the description to describe what tests. So it's kind of the idea of build sort of small tests that are readable, but actually using the code to write sort of something that was fluent. Is that the sort of same thing that you're talking about? So you'd have, say, browser.login. You'd have actual method definitions that method names that mean something.
Yeah, and as I said in my bit of the talk, there are starting to become some kind of patterns for doing that sort of thing, like the page pattern, where you write your step definitions using a page object, and it has on it functions that represent user actions. But if you're going to do that, you could do that. All I'm saying is you could do that with a unit testing tool. You don't need the extra layers of stuff that fools you into thinking you're doing something different.
Special. Yeah. I think that's one of the things that I found is that people who tend to do this page object model type testing feel that they're doing something magical when they're writing these elegant models that map to a page. And then as soon as you change the bit, oh well, I just need to change one little detail here. You still need to change something. You're still quite tied to that. It doesn't feel like you're actually getting much benefit other than writing more code.
Is that somewhat besides the point from a specifically a cucumber gherkin point of view? Would you still not potentially end up with a similar problem if you're writing acceptance tests in any unit or aspect?
Yeah, I mean, to quote Uncle Bob, if
There you go, Bob.
there we go. If when you add a new feature, you have to change some existing tests, your code wasn't solid. You should be able to add new features with open closedness, which is also unachievable utopian ideal.
But it doesn't within this reality.
It's worth aspiring to, but yeah, I don't know anyone who's achieved it. So yes, any test suite is inevitably going to be at the mercy of certain classes of change that will violate its assumptions. Yeah, fine. It just feels like Gherkin is an extra layer of stuff that also has to change when you don't necessarily need it.
It's that difference of the cucumber being the developer tool, but Gherkin being that business tool, or trying to guide that business person to actually write specifications in that way. So forgetting about Gherkin, actually training those business people to write better specs.
Who's had a business person write Gherkin? Okay, good.
Wasn't good Gherkin.
You want to speak? You sit to the back.
I feel like I'll diversify the panel too much. Thanks, Timothy.
Would you want to ask a question?
No. That's what it's a heckle. Yeah, sorry I'm late, everybody. I'm probably asking those questions. But yeah, what is good Gherkin? That's what my question was.
Reusable, something. I'm not an advocate for Gherkin in that. It's more.
Reusable, something. Go on, use your words.
I don't have any.
Is it because there's a girl sat next to you? Thanks for the gin, Dan.
I would say a good Gherkin script is one that makes sense. I think it's like any text. It's just text that makes sense. In terms of relating that to Gherkin, it's something that is then also reusable across multiple texts and using that consistent syntax.
Isn't that the fallacy, though, of Gherkin, or a fallacy of Gherkin? Using that consistent syntax when applied to a natural language, the point of which is having the flexibility to describe any problem.
When you have a square peg, everything is a square peg.
Everything looks like a nail?
No, square peg round hole, that's a template, isn't it? Yeah, try and ram everything in.
But this is
Try
where I might
and
come
hard enough,
across.
it will.
So,
But the question I was having was what is good Gherkin syntax, and what Kevin was saying. There's quite a sea of hands of people who've had business people writing Gherkin syntax, pickle bloody cucumber, and how much of that has been readable, useful? So, show of hands, who's had business people writing Gherkin? Okay? How many of you found that useful? Everybody!
let's go for a step further. Who found it useful after they'd retranslated it into the existing definitions they'd already made? Oh well, alright. That's
Who
me
found
putting
it
my place.
useful or read it 6 months on?
This is a bit
You
of a
didn't raise your
cop-out
hand in the
here.
first place.
Bit of a cop-out, but there's a whole bunch of hands up there who said it was useful. Why was it useful?
Take a seat.
We will continue for another 10 minutes.
We've lost someone here.
Wow, you can't flip.
Yeah, it was useful because it gave us an opportunity to get everyone in the team, developers, business people, everyone just kind of sat down behind the screen and even setting to one side the gherkin, it gave us a really clear, tight, narrow focus. And also, it gave business people a sense that they were contributing, and they got a real buzz out of being sat down. Oh, I'm sat down with the computer and doing computing things. And
typing.
Was that valuable to the product?
it was absolutely.
What did it add to the product?
At the end of it, we could kind of look at this shared document and say, is that what you mean? Yeah, that's exactly what I mean.
So
And it brought clarity.
you're working at it together
Yeah.
rather than somebody going away and working on their own.
Oh, yeah, that would just be crazy. You do a thing like that.
I'm going to step in here, sir. If you said that showed you said that points to this sentence on the screen and said, is that what you mean? Yes, that's exactly what I mean. Excellence, it's green, the chrome pattern. That's a sentence on the screen. There is a huge pile of code that a developer has written behind that, which makes that go green. How do they know that that is doing what that sentence says? It's a false sense of security.
Well, it generated that conversation at that point. And it gave us a kind of focal point at which to talk about. It was a tool to generate a conversation. And we got some text at the end of it.
But did you need to sit around a computer to have that conversation? Could you have not sat and constrained yourself to this natural language Gherkin syntax? Could you not have sat around and used, like real English to have those conversations? Like that really flexible one?
We could. But at the end of that, that would have turned into a meeting where we've all been sat at desks and stuff, and it becomes far more formal. And it becomes more
formal than sitting around and typing it in a programming language.
Oh yeah, because then it's kind of it's a more personal kind of thing. You're physically sat closer. It allows you to have more kind of direct conversations rather than say like I'm sat here and someone will be sat on a chair over there, like shouting stuff up.
What about if you switched out beanbags for the chairs?
Beanbags would be a step forward, but not everyone looks at it gave us a mechanism to have more informal, personal conversations, but also gave us an artifact at the end of it where we could say, and this is this thing what we have produced, rather than
this thing we talked about.
Yeah, you could have the same conversation in the pub, but all you have is empty glasses.
I hate to bring it to money and how clients and businesses work together, but I have found Cucumber has been massively helpful for that. So when you use real English, that's pretty ambiguous. It's open to... Whereas I've often found Cucumber and Gherkin language to be the absolute opposite. I want this. When I do this, this happens.
I want.
Actually, I was here first.
I didn't realise it worked like that.
Yeah, I'm just louder.
Well, it does definitely work like that.
I was really intrigued by Mr. Dickens' story of where it has actually worked well. And again, I'm sorry I'm late, I've missed all the other stuff, but I'd be really interested in some more stories from people who had their hands up how it has worked, because what Mike was saying about actually it broke down some barriers by having that screen up there, and the point of the syntax is to sort of give people a head start over we're developers, we don't really know what we're talking about, how to talk to people, this is a nice little script to get started. So I'd be interested in that as well.
No, you've got to stay here until someone comes. Come back here.
Thank you.
Like him.
Oh my.
5 more minutes.
Sorry.
Yeah,
who's in first?
it's who's first, yeah. My potential diplomatic opinion on this is that everyone's got different opinions, and potentially it's based on personality, but it just seems like it works for quite a few people and it doesn't work for others. It doesn't necessarily have to be a yes or a no, in its entirety. So I think, you seem quite like definitely worked for you. So keep it up, no worries. let's all just have a drink. That was literally my contribution.
I think it worked fine when this given when then was written within in Jira or wherever you wrote it down, and it all went horribly wrong when the developer then tried to take that and turn it into spec flow. I find it quite useful as a way for capturing what the requirements were. Because stories can have a lot of detail in there, but I could just read that given this happens, and then when I poke that, then I should get this result. And that was quite simple for me to understand. But I like things written in that fashion, but when I then actually do the implementation, I wouldn't choose spec flow to do it. There's much better tools. You suggested earlier on, we can write it in N unit to next unit and then have all the power that basically needs to refactor.
I can totally agree with that, because even just getting the requirements in that form, because we're not always in the room when these requirements are made. Rarely, I would say, we're in the room when these requirements are made. So there's just so much knowledge that sits in people's heads, and I'm human, just as guilty as anybody else. You ask me to write down something I know, I'll miss out 80% of the detail easily, because I assume you know what I know. So forcing someone to be prescriptive and say, no, do this, then that, it drags information out of people's heads, I find. Like, I wouldn't worry about the tooling, I'd worry about the information passed along the chain.
Gemma, you were asking for examples of where it works. The only one I have of SpecFlow where it's actually been of value was when I was pairing with you. And we were trying to work out what this cookie was doing on a particular page and explain it to the business because we thought it was wrong and it was fiendishly complicated. And we stuck SpecFlow tests around it all to get this hugely complicated set of conditional logic out and showed it to someone in the business and they said, yes, that's wrong. Which was great because it was impossible to explain to them what it was doing at any one point. And it was great for doing that, but we didn't keep it, we threw it away because the thought of maintaining that pile of shit was way out.
And on that note, yes, I think we will call it time, because that is the ultimate mic drop. So I would like to extend a huge thanks once again to all our participants, firstly to Martin and to Kevin for doing the debate. And again to anybody that is there to sit at the front, it can be daunting. Once again, thank you very much. A further round of applause to anybody who wants to come to the pub.